My daughter-in-law told her mother on the phone the nursery for her baby would be ready by spring. Now my room. Because the old man can just live in the basement now. I set down my coffee. I smiled. I told her that was perfect. I was already looking at condos 3 states away. And she could ask her own mother why the free house they'd been engineering for months was about to disappear. All the color drained from her face. I appreciate you being here with me. One small thing before we start. Leave me a quick comment. Have you ever had a family member treat your home like it already belonged to them? Yes or no? I read every single one. Certain details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and reflection. The lesson at the heart of it is what I hope stays with you. My daughter-in-law stood 15 feet away from me, phone pressed to her ear, and calmly explained to her mother exactly how they planned to take the bedroom where my wife died. I was standing in the kitchen of my own home at 5:15 in the morning. A 70-year-old man brewing coffee the way I have brewed it every day for the last 31 years. Black, strong, no sugar, in the ceramic mug Ruth bought me at a flea market in Fredericksburg the year we turned 40. The house was supposed to be silent. I was supposed to be alone. I had come back inside early from checking the garage door sensor. And Sloane Callahan, my 32-year-old daughter-in-law, a part-time dental receptionist with perfectly manicured nails and a phone perpetually glued to her hand, did not hear me come in. She was sitting in my living room with the speakerphone on, and the voice coming through that speaker belonged to her mother. "The old man can sleep in the basement," Sloane said. "That room is for the baby." I did not move. I did not set the mug down. I stood behind the kitchen island and listened, the way I had listened to stress reports for 40 years, motionless, absorbing every data point before making a single calculation. The voice on the other end was clear, commanding, and unhurried. "Tell him it's temporary. By spring, he won't even remember he had that room." "Mom, what if he says no?" "He won't. Men like that never do. Men like that." She said it the way you describe a material property: tensile strength, load tolerance, breaking point. She had already measured me. She had already decided what I could bear and what would make me fold. And she had never once set foot inside this house. In 40 years of structural engineering, I learned that the most dangerous cracks are the ones you cannot hear. The ones that run silent through the core of a load-bearing wall until the entire structure gives way without warning. I was listening to a crack like that. It had been running through my family for months, maybe longer. And I had not heard it because I had been too busy grieving to listen. The room they were discussing was not a guest room. It was not a spare bedroom with neutral walls and flat-pack furniture. It was the master bedroom of a house I had designed on graph paper in 1988. Built with my own hands alongside the only woman I ever loved. I lived in it for 31 years. Until Ruth Callahan took her last breath in that room on a Tuesday afternoon in October, while I held her hand. And the autumn light came through the bay window she had picked out herself. That bedroom was not a room. It was a reliquary. It held the last breath of the only woman I ever loved. And 2 people I fed and sheltered were planning to convert it into a nursery while I slept on a broken spring in the basement. They were not whispering. They were not ashamed. They were scheduling. Sloane ended the call. I heard her stand, stretch, and walk to the staircase. Her footsteps went up, light, unhurried. The footsteps of a woman who believed she was alone in a house she had already mentally redecorated. She had no idea I was 12 feet away behind the kitchen island, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands. I set the mug down without a sound. I walked down the hallway past the photographs Ruth had hung in chronological order our wedding. Garrett's first birthday. The house under construction, with both of us standing in the framing, like 2 people inside the skeleton of a promise. I passed the master bedroom door. I did not open it. I did not need to. I knew every square inch of that room the way I knew the load tables I had memorized at 22 by heart. Permanently. The way you know the things you built with your own hands and defended with your own name. I walked into my study at the end of the hall. I turned the brass key in the lock. The same lock I had installed in 1995, heavy, deliberate. The kind of lock that tells the house you mean it. I sat down at my mahogany desk. The cedar walls closed around me like the inside of a vault. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized for 25 years. It belonged to a man I had hoped I would never need to call for something like this. Not because he was unreliable, inequality, but because calling him meant I had finally accepted that my own son was not going to save me. No one was going to save me. So I was going to save myself. But before I tell you who answered that phone, you need to understand what that bedroom means, because it is not just a room. It is the last place on earth where my wife's heartbeat still echoes. I spent 40 years designing bridges and high-rises across Texas, overpasses in Dallas, parking structures in San Antonio, a pedestrian bridge in Austin that won a regional engineering award in 2003. I understood load distribution the way most men understand football instinctively, constantly, in my sleep. But the only structure I ever loved was the one I built in Spring Branch with my own hands. Ruth Callahan. My wife of 36 years was a public school art teacher who could find beauty in a concrete beam. The summer we broke ground on the house. She stood inside the bare framing with sawdust in her hair and said, "Build it so it outlasts us both. Vernon, I want this house to remember everything we were." So I did. I selected every beam personally. I supervised every concrete pour. I chose the bay window in the master bedroom because Ruth wanted morning light on the east wall where she planned to put her reading chair. That house cost us 11 months of weekends, most of our savings, and one broken wrist when I fell off the scaffolding in November. It was worth all of it. Spring Branch had changed since we built it. Quiet family lots turned into properties worth more than either of us ever imagined, mine included. You want to know what a structural engineer thinks about when his wife is dying in the bed they shared for 31 years? He thinks about load-bearing walls. He thinks about which parts of himself can be removed and which parts, if taken, will bring the whole man down. Ruth died on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2019. I held her hand in the master bedroom while the autumn light came through the bay window she had picked out, and I felt the exact moment her grip released mine. I did not let go. She did. And when she was gone, I closed the curtains, sat in the chair across from her empty bed, and did not move until morning. I kept that room exactly as she left it. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her cardigan draped over the chair arm, the indent in her pillow that I never fluffed out because it was the last shape she made in this world. Some men clean out the closet and move on. I am not that kind of man. I am the kind who builds a house to last forever and then discovers that forever is the thing he has to survive alone. For 3 years after Ruth died, I lived in that house by myself. I maintained it the way I maintained every structure I ever built, methodically, on schedule, with inspections I performed in my own notebook. The house was silent, and it was mine, and it was enough. Then my son came home. Have you ever opened your front door to your only child and felt, in the marrow of your bones, that you were making a mistake you would spend years paying for? Garrett Callahan, my only son, 35 years old, a supply chain coordinator who carried himself with the permanent slouch of a man who had surrendered every argument before it began. Pulled into my driveway in autumn of 2022 with a rented moving truck and his wife beside him. He said their landlord had raised the rent beyond what they could manage. He needed a place to land. 6 months, Dad, he said, standing in my driveway with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on his shoes. That's all we need. I swear we'll be out before spring. A father wants to believe his son. So I believed him. That was the most expensive mistake I ever made, and I have spent 40 years calculating the cost of mistakes. I cleared 2 guest rooms on the 2nd floor. I bought new towels, I stocked the refrigerator, and I sat down at the kitchen table that evening and wrote 3 rules on a piece of paper, in the same block letters I had used on blueprints for 4 decades. Rule 1. The master bedroom is mine, permanently, no exceptions. Rule 2. Shared spaces are maintained by everyone. Rule 3. A 6-month timeline means 6 months. I taped that paper to the refrigerator door, where no one could miss it. Garrett read it and nodded. Sloane glanced at it and said nothing. Within 6 weeks, every single rule had been broken. The timeline was never mentioned again. The shared spaces became Sloane's domain. And the paper itself, my rules, in my handwriting, on my refrigerator, quietly disappeared one morning, as if the boundaries I had set and the man who set them had never existed at all. I never asked about the paper. I never mentioned that it was gone. I simply walked past the refrigerator one morning and noticed the blank space where my rules had been, a clean rectangle of white surrounded by 3 years of fingerprints, and understood that the erasure of my boundaries was now complete. The first coffee ring appeared on Ruth's mahogany side table 11 days after they moved in. A pale, wet circle stamped directly onto wood my wife and I had bought at an estate sale on our 5th wedding anniversary. I wiped it with a damp cloth, applied lemon oil, and said nothing. The second ring appeared 3 days later, then the third. Then I stopped counting. Because counting implies there might be a number at which someone would stop. And Sloane was never going to stop. She slept until noon most days. She complained about my coffee grinder at 5 in the morning as if I were the guest and she were the homeowner.
"Can you not run that thing before 10?" she said one Saturday.
Standing at the top of the stairs, in a bathrobe she had charged to a credit card, I later learned was linked to my son's account. Some of us actually need sleep. I did not stop making my coffee at 5. That was my one act of resistance. A small, quiet flag, planted in the territory of my own kitchen. The only room in the house where I still felt like the man who built it. The indignities accumulated the way corrosion works on structural steel silently, one molecule at a time, eating through the beam until the thing that held everything together simply snaps under a weight it carried easily the day before. Sloane rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She replaced Ruth's kitchen curtains with blackout panels because the morning light bothered her. She left her vanilla espresso pods scattered across the counter next to my plain black coffee, as if the kitchen were a shared dormitory and I were the less important roommate. Each offense was small. Each one was deliberate. And each one told me the same thing: you are tolerated here, old man. You are not in charge. Garrett saw all of it. He did not intervene once. He developed a talent for being in another room whenever his wife overstepped. A gift for arriving just after the damage was done. Surveying the scene with the expression of a man who had already decided that keeping the peace with Sloane was worth more than keeping faith with his father. I watched him perfect this routine over 2 years and said nothing. Because I was still foolish enough to believe that silence was the same as patience. Then, in the autumn of last year, a black luxury SUV appeared in my driveway. How do you look at a man you raised? A man you taught to ride a bicycle? A man you drove to college orientation with? His entire life packed into the back of a pickup. A man whose first steps you caught with your own 2 hands. And how do you accept that he just stole $40,000 from you and lied about it to your face? I will tell you how. You stand at the kitchen window and watch him polish the hood with a chamois cloth. And you listen to him toss the keys onto the counter and say, "Big bonus work, doctor." They finally recognized what I bring to the table. "That is a beautiful vehicle, son," I said. The most dangerous lie is the one a father tells himself when he pretends he still believes his child. I had seeded that emergency account with $40,000 the year Garrett turned 18. It was meant for exactly what the name said: emergencies, medical bills, job loss. The kind of catastrophe that arrives without warning. Instead, the balance was zero. I found the statement in the kitchen drawer where Garrett kept his mail, folded it open, and saw the withdrawal history. A series of transfers over 9 months, steady and systematic, ending with a lump payment to an auto dealer in Katy. I folded the statement with the same precision I used to fold engineering blueprints' sharp crease. Clean edge, no wasted motion. I walked to my study, opened the safe, placed the document inside, and turned the dial. Then I went back to the window. Garrett was still polishing the car. The chamois moved in slow circles across the hood, catching the October sun. And my son whistled while he worked on the surface of a vehicle purchased with money I had saved for his worst day. I watched him for a long time. When I finally turned away, something had shifted behind my eyes. The way a load-bearing wall shifts 1 degree before anyone notices. I no longer saw my son out there. I saw a structural liability living inside my house, and I had just locked the proof in my safe. I carried that shift in perspective with me for a full year, watching my son, through the lens of a man cataloging damage instead of a father hoping for repair. But I was still aiming at the wrong target. I did not know that until 2 days after the overheard phone call. Standing barefoot in the dark hallway outside the guest bedroom at 11 o'clock at night, I had gotten up to use the bathroom. The house was supposed to be asleep, but as I passed the guest bedroom door, I saw the thin strip of light beneath it and heard Sloane's voice, low, careful, the voice of someone who did not want to be overheard. I stopped. I pressed my fingertips against the hallway wall for balance and held my breath. The speakerphone was on again, and this time the voice on the other end was not giving casual advice. It was issuing orders. First the bedroom, then the study, the voice said. Clear, commanding, unhurried, the cadence of a woman who had planned this the way I planned bridge foundations. By Easter, we host the whole family there. It's our house now, Sloane. He just doesn't know it yet. Our house. She said it twice in that conversation. A woman who had never driven a single nail into this structure, who had never written a single check for a single property tax payment, who had never spent a single night under this roof she called the home I built with my dying wife, our house. And she said it the way you say something you have already decided is true. What if he figures it out? Sloane whispered. He's 70 years old and he lives alone. He'll be grateful for the company. I stood in that hallway and felt the cold hardwood under my bare feet and the faint trace of Ruth's jasmine perfume drifting from the master bedroom door behind me. And I listened to a woman I had never properly met describe me as an aging obstacle too lonely to resist. She had measured my grief and calculated that it made me weak. She had assessed my solitude and concluded it made me desperate. She was wrong on both counts, but she did not know that yet, because she had never once looked a structural engineer in the eye and tried to take something he built. The plan unfolded in precise phases. The bedroom first established the nursery as a moral imperative no grandfather could refuse. Then the study, reframed as a guest room for extended family visits. Then every major holiday claimed as a gathering at the house, cementing occupation through tradition until the original owner became a tenant in his own home. It was not greed, it was not impulse. It was architecture. In engineering, we call it parasitic load weight that contributes nothing to the structural integrity of a building, but slowly, invisibly drains the capacity of every beam designed to hold it up. Lorraine Prescott was a parasitic load with a business plan. She was 62 years old, a retired hospital billing supervisor who had spent 30 years navigating bureaucratic systems designed to say no. And she had turned those skills on my family like a surgeon turning a scalpel on a patient who was already under anesthesia. Stone was not the architect of this takeover. Sloane was the instrument, coached, Scripted. Positioned. The architect was sitting in another city entirely, directing the demolition of my life through a speakerphone. Sloane's voice again, quieter now. "Mom, are you sure about the study? He practically lives in there." "That's exactly why it needs to go. A man with his own room has his own territory. Take the territory and you take the man." I closed my eyes. I let the words settle the way I let stress data settle before making a calculation. No reaction until all the variables are accounted for. Then I stepped away from the door without making a sound. My bare feet found every silent plank in that hallway because I had laid each one myself, and I knew where the creaks lived. In my study. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled my engineering notebook from the drawer. The same leather-bound book I had used for 40 years to calculate stress fractures and load tolerances on structures worth millions of dollars. I opened to a blank page and wrote a single line in the block letters I had used on every blueprint since 1982. Not the daughter-in-law, the mother. Below it I wrote the date and drew a clean horizontal line. Everything above that line was the life I had been living. Everything below it was the life I was about to engineer. The next morning I did what I had done for 40 years when a structure showed signs of failure. I started measuring. I sat at my desk with the engineering notebook open to the page I had marked the night before and drew 5 columns across a fresh spread date. Time, observation, source. And a 5th column I labeled match because what I was looking for was not random behavior. I was looking for a pattern. And patterns, unlike emotions, do not lie. The data came fast. Tuesday morning, 9:14 a.m. Sloane on the phone in the kitchen saying, "Our forever home," in a tone that sounded rehearsed. I wrote it down. Thursday evening at dinner. She repeated the phrase to Garrett. Same words, same inflection. Same cadence I had heard through the guest bedroom door in Lorraine's voice. I noted it in the match column. Exact echo, source confirmed. By the 4th day, I had cataloged 11 phrases Sloane used. "This size needs life in it. He'll come around when he sees how much better it is." Each one traceable to the overheard calls. Each one delivered in Sloane's voice, but built in her mother's workshop. A parrot does not understand the words it repeats. But the person who trained the parrot chose every syllable with care. Sloane left her phone on the kitchen counter one morning while she showered. I did not touch it. I did not need to. The screen was face up, and the text thread was open, a long chain of messages from a contact labeled Mom, with instructions so specific they read like project management notes. Use the word nursery, not bedroom. It sounds medical. Necessary. Don't bring up the study yet. Wait until he agrees to the first room. Remind Garrett to stay out of it. Let him think it's your idea. I photographed the screen with my own phone from 2 feet away. Returned to my study and added the images to the notebook. Page 8, then 9, then 10. The notebook that had spent 40 years calculating whether bridges could hold the weight of traffic was now calculating whether my family could hold the weight of its own deception. On a Sunday afternoon in early November, Sloane set up a video call in the living room. I heard her laughing. Heard a voice I recognized from the speakerphone calls but had never matched to a face. I walked in casually, coffee in hand, as if I were just passing through. Lorraine Prescott smiled at me through that tablet screen while she described, in the pleasant tone of a woman making small talk, exactly how she planned to take everything I had built. She was 62 years old. A retired hospital billing supervisor with silver-streaked hair pulled tight and reading glasses perched on her nose like a woman reviewing an invoice. Her eyes moved past me the moment I entered the frame, not to greet me, but to scan the room behind my shoulder. I watched those eyes catalog the crown molding, the bay windows, the hardwood floors I had laid by hand. She was not looking at a family member. She was appraising a property. "Vernon," Sloane has told me so much about the house, Lorraine said, her voice warm and expansive, the voice of a hostess welcoming guests to someone else's home. I cannot wait to see it in person. A home like that deserves a full family in every room. You're welcome to visit any time. Lorraine, I said. I said it the way you speak to a contractor who has already submitted a fraudulent bid. Polite, precise, and with every exit already mapped. I stayed for 3 minutes. I complimented her glasses. I asked about her health. Then I excused myself and walked toward the hallway. And as I rounded the corner, just before the living room disappeared from my line of sight, I heard Lorraine's voice drop half a register. He seems lonely, sweetheart. That big house, all those empty rooms. We'll fix that by Christmas. By Christmas. She had given herself a deadline. A woman who had never set foot in my house had circled a date on her calendar and decided that by December 25th, every room I built would belong to her family, and I would be too grateful, too old, and too broken to object. I walked into my study and closed the door. I looked down at my notebook, 12 pages of evidence compiled in 9 days. Dates, times, phrases, patterns, photographs. All of it pointing to one woman who had just smiled at me through a screen and mapped her conquest in real time. She had given me a deadline. She did not know I had already given myself one. I had my deadline, and I had my notebook. What I did not have was a plan not yet. That changed on a Saturday evening in mid-November, when the bass hit the foundation before I even opened my eyes. A deep, rhythmic tremor ran through the floor joists of a house that had never once, in 31 years, vibrated from someone else's music. I had fallen asleep in my study chair after dinner. When I opened the door, the hallway was warm with unfamiliar perfume, and the sound of overlapping voices I did not recognize. I walked toward the living room and stopped at the threshold. 15 people I had never met filled every seat, every corner, every surface. Ruth's dining table, the one we had received as a wedding gift from her parents in 1983, was covered with catered platters, still in their foil trays. The living room furniture had been rearranged against the walls to create an open space in the center. Someone had moved Ruth's side table next to the couch and was using it as a drink stand, condensation pooling on the mahogany without a coaster. Sloane stood in the middle of the room, holding a glass of wine, gesturing at the walls as if she were conducting a private tour. "Oh, the house," she said to a woman I had never seen before. "We're making it ours finally, giving it some life after all those years of just sitting here, empty." All those years. She described the 3 decades Ruth and I lived in this house. Raised our son, celebrated holidays, held each other through illness and loss, and quiet evenings by the bay window as emptiness, as something that needed to be corrected. A man near the fireplace noticed me standing in the doorway. He smiled politely and extended his hand. "Are you the father-in-law?" he asked. "Sloane said you mostly keep to yourself upstairs." Upstairs. In the house I designed. The house I built. The house I paid for with 40 years of engineering work. Upstairs as if I were a tenant in the attic. A quiet inconvenience the real residents had learned to work around. I shook his hand. I did not correct him. I smiled and stepped into the room the way you step onto a construction site where someone else has been making unauthorized modifications. Carefully, observing everything, touching nothing. Sloane spotted me from across the room. She did not look embarrassed. She did not apologize for the unannounced gathering. Instead, she tilted her head, smiled the smile I had seen her practice in the hallway mirror, and raised her voice so every guest could hear. "Vernon, would you be a dear and grab a few bottles from the cellar? The Pinot, you know which ones." She did not ask. She performed. The request was not for the wine, it was for the audience. 15 witnesses to the moment the owner of the house became the staff. I carried wine to a table of strangers in my own home. Smiled, and set the bottles down without a word, not because I had nothing to say, but because silence was the most expensive thing I could afford to spend. I went down to the cellar. The stairs were cold under my shoes, and the air smelled of must and stone. The same cellar I had excavated myself during the original construction, hauling out dirt by the wheelbarrow while Ruth kept a tally of loads in her sketchbook. I selected 3 bottles of the Pinot Noir. I carried them upstairs. I set them on the kitchen counter without a word, and I walked away while Sloane's guests reached for the bottles I had chosen and stored and paid for, without a single one of them asking who I was. I walked to my study. I turned the brass deadbolt, the same lock I had installed 30 years ago, heavy and deliberate. I sat down at my desk and listened through the door. Laughter, clinking glasses, the muffled bass still vibrating through the walls. They were drinking my wine, eating off my plates, sitting on my furniture, in my house, at my table. And I let them. Because every good engineer knows you do not stop a load test before the structure reveals where it will fail. Through the locked door, Sloane's voice rose above the laughter. By Christmas, Mom's going to love this place. I opened my notebook to page 13 and wrote it down. Date, time, exact quote. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Boyd Ellsworth's after-hours number. It rang twice. He answered on the 3rd ring, and the first thing he said was my name, not as a question, but as a man who had been expecting this call. Boyd told me to call back in the morning with a clear head. I did not sleep. I cleaned instead. The wine had soaked through the rug overnight. Ruth's rug, the Persian she found at an estate sale in Galveston the summer before the diagnosis, and by the time I knelt beside it at 5 in the morning, the stain had already set. Dark burgundy bleeding into the cream and crimson weave, like a wound that had been left open too long. I filled a bucket with cold water and dish soap. I took the stiff, bristled brush from under the kitchen sink, the same brush Ruth used to clean grout on her hands and knees every spring, and I scrubbed. The wet rasp of bristles against wool was the only sound in the house. Everyone else was asleep. The guests were gone. The catered trays were crusted over on every surface. Cigarette ash dusted the porch railing. Sticky rings marked the sideboard Ruth had inherited from her grandmother. I scrubbed for 40 minutes. The stain faded from burgundy to rust, but it would never come out entirely. Some damage is permanent. That is not a tragedy, it is a fact. And facts are the raw material of engineering. Ruth bought that rug for $200. She said it was the only beautiful thing she ever got for nothing. Kneeling on that wet wool in my pajama pants at dawn, I understood that it was not nothing anymore. It was evidence. Every coffee ring, every moved piece of furniture, every cigarette burn and wine stain, evidence of a systematic campaign to erase a woman who was no longer here to defend herself. That morning, on my knees, scrubbing wine from a dead woman's rug, I was preparing myself to carry a weight I had not yet calculated, but could already feel gathering. By 6:15, the dishes were washed, the glasses were stacked, and the house looked exactly as it had before the party. I wanted it that way. When the blade is sharp enough, you do not announce it. I brewed my coffee, black, strong, iron bitter at 5 a.m. the way it always was, and carried it to my study. At 8 o'clock, I called Boyd. Boyd Ellsworth was 63 years old, an estate and trust attorney who had handled Ruth's and my legal affairs for a quarter century. He spoke the way old-growth oak looks unhurried, dense and impossible to move once planted. I had called his after-hours number the night before, and he had answered as if he had been sitting by the phone. Now, in the morning light, I laid it out for him. The overheard calls, the notebook with 13 pages of documented evidence, the Christmas deadline, the party, the wine on Ruth's rug. Boyd listened without interrupting. Not a question, not a comment, not even the sound of breathing. When I finished, there was a pause so long I thought the line had dropped. Boyd, I need to talk about the house, I said. I need to protect it. Another pause. Then his voice, steady and low. Vernon, I have been waiting 2 years for this call. 2 years. Boyd had been holding that sentence for 2 years. My wife had seen from her deathbed what I could not see standing in my own living room. Ruth asked me to watch out for you, Boyd said. Before the funeral, she had already written me a letter. I have it in my files. She saw this coming before any of us did. I set my coffee down. My hand was not shaking. It had not shaken once during 40 years of inspecting structures where a single miscalculation could kill people. But something inside my chest shifted. The way a foundation shifts when the ground beneath it turns out to be different from what the survey promised. Ruth had known. She had known while she was dying, while I held her hand in the bedroom they were trying to take. While the autumn light came through the bay window, she picked out. She had known that someone would come for the house, and she had already started building the defense. The only person who had not seen it was the structural engineer, who spent 40 years identifying failure points in buildings, but could not see the one forming inside his own family. There are instructions in the letter, Boyd continued. Specific ones, in Ruth's handwriting, about the house, about a trust, and about one name she underlined twice. What name? I will not say it over the phone. Come to my office this week. Vernon, bring your notebook. And bring whatever else you have been keeping in that safe of yours. Ruth saw this coming. It is time we finished what she started. I had not yet made it to Boyd's office when the ground shifted again. The name Ruth underlined twice would have to wait because 3 days after my call with Boyd, my son sat down at the dinner table, took his wife's hand, and told me I was going to be a grandfather. For exactly 11 seconds. I forgot about all of it. The notebook, the attorney, the wine stain on Ruth's rug, the woman mapping my house through a tablet screen. For 11 seconds I was just a man, hearing the best news he had received since the worst news of his life. And the joy that hit me was so clean and so sudden that it knocked every calculation out of my head like a power surge blowing a fuse. Dad, we're having a baby, Garrett said. His voice cracked on the word baby. He was grinning the way he used to grin when he was 10 and had done something he was proud of. Wide, unguarded, looking for my approval before anyone else's. Due in mid-January. I stood up before I knew I was standing. I pulled my son into a hug and held him the way I had not held him since we buried his mother. His shoulders were thinner than I remembered. His arms tightened around my back. And for one moment, one fragile, unrepeatable moment, the house felt like a family home again. Congratulations, Sloan, I said. Truly. I meant it. God help me. In that moment, I meant every syllable. A grandchild. Ruth would have wept. She would have been measuring the nursery walls before dessert. Mom would have loved this, Garrett said quietly. She would have been in that nursery before the paint dried. Let me tell you something about joy when you are 70 years old and your wife is dead and your house is under siege. It does not arrive clean. It arrives with a price tag stapled to the back of it, and you do not see the number until the feeling has already made you soft. The pivot came 4 minutes later. The roast chicken was cooling on Ruth's serving platter. The wine I had poured in celebration sat untouched in my glass. Sloane's voice shifted, the warmth thinning out, the softness replaced by something brisk and logistical, the tone of a woman transitioning from an announcement to an agenda. We should probably talk about rooms, she said. She did not look at Garrett when she said it. She looked at me. The master is closer to the kitchen, better for night feedings. And Mom offered to stay for the first few months. So the guest room needs to be ready before the new year. 3 rooms. She claimed 3 rooms in a single sentence: master bedroom, study, guest room for Lorraine. Each one disguised as a practical necessity for the baby. Each one matching the plan I had heard through the guest bedroom door weeks earlier, word for word. room for room, phase for phase. In engineering, we call it a Trojan load, a weight that enters a structure disguised as something the building needs. And by the time you realize it is destroying the foundation, you cannot remove it without bringing down the walls. My unborn grandchild had just become a Trojan load. Not because the baby was a weapon. The baby was innocent. The baby was wanted. The baby was the only genuinely good thing to happen in this house in years. But the baby had been positioned, timed, deployed at the exact moment when saying no to the bedroom would mean saying no to my own grandchild's comfort. "We can figure it out." "Dad," Garrett said. "No rush." But his eyes stayed on Sloane the way a dog's eyes stay on the person holding the leash, and he did not contradict a single word she had said. Not the master bedroom, not the study, not the guest room for Lorraine. He offered me patience the way you offer a bandage to someone you are not willing to stop cutting. I smiled. I congratulated them again. I cleared the dishes while they went upstairs, and I listened to their footsteps above me the way I used to listen to stress patterns in a bridge deck, measuring the load, calculating the trajectory, predicting where the next crack would appear. After they went to bed, I sat in my study and opened the notebook. I drew a timeline across the bottom of page 14. Master bedroom by December, study by January, guest room ready before the new year for Lorraine. Every room Sloane had named matched the overheard plan exactly. My unborn grandchild was not the reason for the rearrangement. My unborn grandchild was the reason I could not say no. But even a man who cannot say no can still say nothing. And silence, I was learning, is its own kind of engineering. I kept my mouth shut about the room demands. I kept my notebook locked in the study. And I waited for the one person in this house who might still surprise me. How many times does your son have to open his mouth and close it again before you stop counting it as almost? It happened on a Tuesday evening, late November. Sloane had gone to lie down in the guest bedroom. The pregnancy was making her tired by 7 o'clock. And the house went quiet in a way it rarely did anymore. Garrett and I were alone in the kitchen, standing side by side at the sink the way we used to when he was a boy, and Ruth would assign us dish duty after Sunday dinners. I washed, he dried. He dried each plate the way his mother taught him. Towel flat, 2 circles, stack on the left. He was 35 years old, and he still dried plates like a 10-year-old standing on a step stool with his sleeves rolled up, trying to get it right because his mother was watching. That is the thing about children. They carry the dead forward in small gestures. They do not even know they are making, and it will break your heart every single time. The warm water ran over my hands. The steam rose between us. Garrett's breathing changed, shorter, tighter. The way a man breathes when he is building up to something he has been carrying too long. I did not look at him. I have spent 40 years reading structures under stress, and I know that the worst thing you can do to a beam about to speak is stare at it. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he said. He did not look up from the plate. "About the house. About what Sloane—" He stopped. Not because he lost the words. I could see them sitting right there behind his teeth, pressing against the back of his lips, the way water presses against a dam that has already started to crack. He stopped because he heard something I did not hear yet. One word from the other room. Not a shout, not a question, not even a command. Just his name. Spoken in Sloane's voice, with the calm, proprietary tone of a woman who had learned exactly how much pressure it takes to pull a man out of a conversation he is not supposed to be having. "Garrett?" One word. And he put the plate down wet. He never left a plate wet in 35 years. Through every phase of boyhood and manhood and whatever he had become in this house, Garrett Callahan had never once set down a plate without finishing the second circle. Ruth's training was that deep. It was muscle memory. It was sacred. He put the plate down wet on the counter, the towel draped over it like a flag of surrender, and said, Never mind, Dad. It's nothing. It was not nothing. We both knew it was not nothing. But he walked out of the kitchen toward the sound of her voice without looking back. Not running, not hurrying, just moving with the automatic obedience of a man answering a leash he had learned not to feel. I stood at the sink with the water still running. I picked up the wet plate he had abandoned and dried it myself, towel flat. 2 circles, stack on the left. Ruth's method. My hands completing the gesture my son could not finish. Through the wall. I heard Sloane's voice, low, steady. The tone flattened into something between a question and a warning. I could not make out the words. Then Garrett's answer, barely audible through the drywall. Just loud enough for a man with an engineer's ear pressed toward the sound. No. I didn't tell him anything. I turned off the water. I dried my hands on the towel my son had dropped. The kitchen was quiet now, the cedar cabinets I had installed myself standing patient and still around me. The dinner plates stacked in the rack. The cold coffee from before the meal sitting untouched on the counter. I walked to my study. I opened the notebook to the page where I had been tracking variables, evidence on the left, assets on the right, and in the center, a narrow column I had labeled Allies 3 weeks earlier with cautious, provisional hope. There was one name in that column. I drew a single line through it. My son was not going to save me. My son could not even save himself. The trust plan would proceed with one name on the right side of the ledger. And it was not Garrett's. It was Boyd Ellsworth's. And it was time I went to see him, after I drew that line through my son's name. I sat in my study staring at the notebook where only one ally remained, Boyd Ellsworth. That would have to be enough. 2 days later, it started. She knocked on my study door on a Tuesday morning, the first time she had ever knocked instead of walking in. And I knew immediately that whatever came next had been rehearsed. Sloane stood in the doorway with both hands clasped in front of her waist, fingers laced like a choir singer waiting for the opening note. I had lived under the same roof as this woman for nearly 3 years. I had never once seen her clasp her hands. I was wondering, and it's totally fine if not, could we try moving a few things in the master bedroom? She tilted her head. And even the tilt looked practiced. Just to see if a crib would fit. Nothing permanent. Nothing permanent. I set my pen down slowly so she would not see the recognition hit. That phrase was Lorraine's fingerprint. I had heard her use it on the video call 3 weeks earlier. The call Sloane did not know I had recorded in my notebook start with something temporary. Something he can agree to. Nothing permanent. Word for word, Sloane was reading from a script she did not know I had already seen. She continued, "The baby would need space. The guest room was too far from the bathroom. The master bedroom had the best light. A compact crib would fit beside the window if they moved the side table and the reading chair." She said all of this in a voice so gentle it sounded like a nature documentary narration. And I understood that every syllable had been approved by a woman 60 miles away, who had never set foot in my house. When someone asks for something temporary and uses the exact words their mother rehearsed on a phone call they do not know you overheard, that is not a request. That is a siege ladder leaned against your wall with a ribbon on it. Of course, Sloane. Whatever makes you comfortable. Her eyes widened. She had expected resistance. Lorraine had probably coached her through 3 rounds of objections, and I had skipped to the end. She thanked me twice, touched my arm, another first, and left so quickly her sneakers squeaked on the hallway tile. I waited until she was downstairs. Then I walked into the master bedroom and began. The side table went first, a small oak piece Ruth had found at an estate sale in Bel Air, still bearing the water ring from her nightly glass. I carried it to the garage. Then the floor lamp. Then the stack of hardcovers she had never finished, each one holding her bookmark at the exact page where she had set it down for the last time. But the chair was different. Ruth's reading chair sat beside the window where afternoon light came through the live oaks. Deep green velvet. worn pale on both arms, where her elbows had rested every evening for 26 years. The cushion still held her shape, not metaphorically, literally. The foam had compressed into the specific geography of her body, and no amount of fluffing had ever changed it back. I wrapped that chair in moving blankets the way you wrap a wound carefully, with both hands, knowing the damage was already done but refusing to let it get worse. I carried it downstairs alone, loaded it into my truck, and drove 22 minutes to the CubeSmart on Mason Road in Katy. The unit smelled like concrete and chemical sealant. I slid the chair inside, rolled the door shut, and clicked the padlock closed. I carried my dead wife's reading chair out of the bedroom she slept in for 31 years, and the woman who was taking her room did not even offer to hold the door. Sloane thought I was clearing space for her nursery. I was evacuating Ruth's belongings before the occupation reached them. There is a difference between surrender and a controlled withdrawal, and I had spent 40 years engineering structures that knew the difference. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and called Boyd on speaker. She started. The bedroom probe exactly the way we predicted. How fast can we move? I filed the preliminary trust documents yesterday, Boyd said. We are ahead of her, comfortably ahead. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. Then Boyd paused. There is something else. Ruth's letter there was a second page, folded behind the first. I should have mentioned it sooner. It is a list. Vernon. Items she wanted protected. Written in her handwriting. I gripped the steering wheel. What is first on the list? The reading chair. The parking lot was empty. The coffee in my travel mug had gone cold hours ago. And my dead wife, who had been gone for 6 years, had just told me I was doing exactly the right thing. Ruth had known. That was the thought I carried from the CubeSmart parking lot back to Spring Branch, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. She had written a list of things to protect, and the first item was the chair I had just locked away on instinct alone. My wife had seen this coming before I did. The phone rang at 10 the next morning, and the caller ID said Prescott, the first time that name had ever appeared on my screen without Sloane's number attached to it. I stared at it for 2 full rings. Lorraine Prescott had never called me directly. She had always worked through her daughter, passing instructions down the chain like a general who never visits the front line. Until now. I answered with my notebook open. Vernon, I just wanted to call and say how excited we all are about the baby, Lorraine said, and her voice filled my study like perfume sprayed in an elevator everywhere at once. Impossible to escape. Designed to make you feel enclosed. Families should share resources at a time like this. That big, beautiful house has so much room for everyone. That big, beautiful house. She said it the way a buyer talks about a property at an open house, admiring. Covetous. Already calculating square footage. That's very kind of you. Lorraine, I said. We're all looking forward to it. I gave her nothing. No resistance to push against, no weakness to catalog, no anger to report back to Sloane. I gave her exactly what you give a surveyor who does not know you have already moved the property lines. Lorraine called me Dad once, casually. Near the end of the call, a woman I had met exactly once on a video screen. Not my daughter, not my family, not my friend. And it landed like a flag planted in soil that did not belong to her. I was thinking of coming down for Christmas, she said. Maybe staying through the New Year, to help with the preparations. You're always welcome, I said. She called it help. An engineer calls it preloading, adding weight to a structure gradually so it does not recognize the burden until the collapse is already inevitable. The call lasted 11 minutes. I did not sip my coffee once. When she hung up, I looked at the black surface of the mug and saw it had gone cold, a faint skin forming on top. I had given her warmth and politeness and absolutely nothing she could use. I turned to a fresh page in my notebook and drew a vertical line down the center. On the left, I wrote Phase 1. On the right, Phase 2. Phase 1 was the trust. Boyd had already filed the preliminary documents. We had until the baby arrived mid-January, if the pregnancy held the schedule. Every week between now and then was a week to reinforce. Transfer the deed into an irrevocable trust named after Ruth. Make it airtight. Make it so that by the time Lorraine Prescott walked through my front door for Christmas, the house she had been mapping for months would already belong to a legal entity she could not charm, threaten, or outlast. Phase 2 was the stage. One gathering, one audience. One moment when every person who had conspired to take this house discovered simultaneously that it was gone. Not destroyed, not sold, but placed beyond their reach by the man they had dismissed as a grieving old fool, too slow to see what was happening around him. In structural engineering, the most dangerous moment is not the collapse. It is the silence before it. When every beam is holding exactly the weight it was designed to hold and not 1 pound more. That silence is where I needed Lorraine to stay until I was ready. I closed the notebook and looked at the calendar on the wall. Ruth's calendar, the one she had bought the year she died, still turned to the month she last touched it. The pages had not moved in 6 years. I reached up and turned them forward, one by one, each month crackling under my fingers like paper that had forgotten it was supposed to bend. I turned past December and stopped on January and circled the 15th. Below the circle I wrote 2 words, load test. Lorraine was coming for Christmas. She did not know that by the time she arrived, the house would already belong to a trust named after the woman whose calendar I had just finally turned. I had circled mid-January. The baby chose December. The call came at 3 in the morning. Garrett's voice cracking through the phone like a wire pulled too tight. Sloane was in labor. 6 weeks early. I was dressed and in my truck in 4 minutes, driving the dark stretch of Interstate 10 toward Texas Children's Hospital, with both hands locked on the wheel and Ruth's calendar still open on the wall behind me. Its circled date suddenly meaningless. The baby came 6 weeks early, and for the first time since Ruth died, I ran. Through the hospital entrance, past the admitting desk, down a corridor that smelled like bleach and recycled air, until a nurse pointed me to the waiting room and told me to sit. So I sat. 5 in the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A row of empty plastic chairs stretching in both directions, and a vending machine in the corner humming like it was keeping a secret. I pulled out my phone and called Boyd. I kept my voice low. The tile walls echoed everything. Boyd, the baby is coming now. Early December, 6 weeks early. Is the trust ready? A pause. The sound of papers. The documents are drafted. We can sign before Christmas if you can get to my office this week. Before Christmas. Lorraine's plane ticket was booked for December 21st. I had known that since the phone call. Since she had announced her holiday visit with the warmth of a woman who was not visiting but arriving. The trust had to be signed before she walked through my front door. Every month I thought I had was now a week. Every week was now a day. Let me tell you what it feels like to sit in a hospital waiting room at 70 years old, waiting for a grandchild your dead wife will never hold, while a woman you have never met in person plans to move into the house your wife helped you build. It feels like being the last beam standing in a building everyone else has already decided to tear down. You do not get to grieve and strategize at the same time, but you do it anyway, because no one else is going to do either. I sat in that plastic chair for 2 hours. I did not touch the vending machine coffee. I did not open my notebook. I just sat. And I waited. And I thought about Ruth holding Garrett for the first time 35 years ago. The way she had looked up at me with that expression that said, "Everything we build from this point forward has a different weight." The delivery room door opened at 7:14. Garrett stood in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes and a blue surgical gown hanging off his shoulders like a costume he had not expected to wear. "Dad, come meet your grandchild." He looked like his mother in that moment. Ruth's eyes, Ruth's trembling lip when something mattered too much to hold steady. I stood up and followed my son into the room. Sloane was propped against pillows, exhausted, her hair matted to her forehead. She looked younger than 32. She looked like someone who had just done the hardest thing a body can do and was still deciding whether it had been worth it. A nurse placed the baby in my arms. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. 10 fingers gripping at air. A face that looked like every Callahan who had ever lived, Ruth's brow, my father's chin, Garrett's ears. I held that child in the notebook. The trust, the calendar, the storage unit, the phone calls, the overheard plans, all of it disappeared for exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That is how long pure joy lasted before the engineer's mind switched back on and I remembered that the child in my arms was not just my grandchild. This baby was also Lorraine Prescott's grandchild. And Lorraine had already claimed every room this child would sleep in. I leaned down and whispered against the warm skin of that tiny forehead. I will never let you grow up in a house. Forehead. I will never let you grow up in a house built on lies. Sloane smiled from the bed. She thought I was talking about honesty, about raising this child with good values and open hearts. She heard a grandfather's tenderness. I was talking about ownership, about a deed that would be transferred into an irrevocable trust before this child's first Christmas. About a woman in another city who would arrive in 17 days expecting to find a house she could take, and would instead find a structure that had already been reinforced beyond her reach. On the drive home, I passed the exit for Boyd's office and kept driving. Then I turned around. 17 days. The trust could not wait for next week. Nothing could wait anymore. Boyd and I signed the trust on a Tuesday. Lorraine arrived on a Thursday, 5 days ahead of schedule. As if even her travel itinerary was designed to catch people off guard. She came through the front door with a suitcase in one hand and a gift bag in the other. With the smile of a woman who had already redecorated every room she walked through. The suitcase was large. Not weekend large, not holiday large, but relocation large. She parked it in the foyer the way you plant a flag in claimed territory and turned to the baby carrier on the couch. She held my grandchild for 90 seconds. I counted. She adjusted the blanket, said something about strong lungs, kissed the forehead once, and handed the baby back to Sloane. Then she turned to the living room and began, "This wall comes down," she said, running her manicured fingers along the plaster. "Open concept. So the kitchen flows into the dining area." Her heels clicked across the hard wood as she moved from room to room, and Sloane followed 2 steps behind her, nodding at every suggestion like a student shadowing a professor on hospital rounds. The study was next. Lorraine stood in the doorway and looked at my bookshelves the way a demolition crew looks at a building scheduled for Wednesday. This would make a beautiful playroom. "Sloane, all these old books can go to storage." Sloane nodded. "I told you the bones were incredible. Vernon's kept it up beautifully." "The bones are staying," Lorraine said. "Everything else is negotiable." 4 rooms. She claimed 4 rooms in 45 minutes and held my grandchild for 90 seconds. If you think those numbers do not tell you everything you need to know about Lorraine Prescott, you have not been paying attention. The baby was a key. The house was the door. And Lorraine had come to Houston not to meet her grandchild, but to walk through every room she intended to own. I followed 3 steps behind them both, hands in my pockets, saying nothing. I watched Lorraine measure the master bedroom window with her eyes and announce that plantation shutters would replace the curtains Ruth had chosen in 1994. I watched her open closet doors without asking. I watched her stand in the center of the hallway and pivot slowly, taking in the ceiling height, the light fixtures, the crown molding I had installed myself the year Garrett started kindergarten. She was not visiting. She was conducting an acquisition. The tour ended in the kitchen. I was pouring coffee when Lorraine came up behind me and placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, practiced, condescending the way you pat a dog that has finally stopped barking. "You are a wonderful grandfather, Vernon," she said. Her perfume was heavy, floral, expensive, the kind that fills a room and erases whatever scent was there before. Ruth's lavender sachets had held these rooms for 6 years. Lorraine's perfume had overwritten them in an afternoon. A man who knows how to sacrifice for his family. This house deserves to be full of life again, and it will be. She was building on ground she had not surveyed, with materials she had not tested, on a timeline she had not verified. It always ends the same way. "I couldn't agree more, Lorraine," I said. I meant every word. The house would be full of life. It would also be full of a legally binding, irrevocable trust that Boyd Ellsworth and I had signed 48 hours earlier over medium-rare ribeyes at Pappas Brothers' Steakhouse on Westheimer. The Ruth Callahan Family Trust. Irrevocable, filed, binding. Every wall she wanted to tear down. Every room she wanted to claim. Every closet she had opened without permission. All of it belonged to a legal entity she could not charm, threaten, or outlast. She patted my shoulder one more time and smiled. I smiled back the way you smile at a contractor who has just poured a foundation on land she does not own. That night, after Lorraine had gone to bed in the guest room she had already mentally converted into a sitting parlor, I sat in my study and opened the bottom drawer. The trust documents lay inside, crisp and heavy. I ran my fingers across the cover page where Ruth's name sat in bold type, anchoring the entire structure the way she had anchored everything. Lorraine Prescott was sleeping in a house that no longer belonged to any living person she could manipulate. She just did not know it yet. And I was in no hurry to tell her, not until the audience was right and the stage was set. Lorraine slept soundly that night, and every night after. She had no reason not to. The house felt like hers already. She had measured it, narrated its renovation, and patted the owner on the shoulder like a man being gently led out of his own life. She did not check the study drawer. She did not ask about attorneys. By the time Sloane's belly had rounded into the 3rd trimester, the notebook had grown from a record into an archive 30 pages, then 40, then 47. Each one added in the quiet hour after everyone else went to bed. I spread the notebook across my desk. 47 pages, 6 weeks of evidence, and for the first time I read it not as a man defending his house, but as an engineer inspecting a structure for everyone still living inside it. 212 individual entries, each one dated, timed, and cross-referenced. Call logs matched to phrases, matched to actions, matched to Lorraine's original instructions. The first overheard phone call in October. The echoed phrases, 11 of them, tracked from Lorraine's mouth to Sloane's within 72 hours of each coaching session. The screenshots of text messages left visible on the kitchen counter. The party where 15 strangers ate off Ruth's plates. The bedroom probe with its rehearsed script. Every beam, every joint, every load-bearing wall of their scheme documented. Boyd had reviewed the financial records earlier that week. The emergency fund Ruth and I had built over 2 decades, gone in 9 months. Not stolen in one dramatic withdrawal. Redirected. Sloane had used it for furniture deposits and 3 wire transfers to an account bearing Lorraine's name. Boyd had a term for it. Elder financial exploitation. I had a simpler one. Demolition by installment. $40,000. That is what 20 years of saving looks like when someone else decides it belongs to them, not in one dramatic theft, but in dozens of small redirections. Each one too minor to fight over, and too deliberate to forgive. Ruth and I had built that fund the way we built everything, slowly, carefully, one deposit at a time. And it was dismantled the same way, only faster and without permission. I added the final annotations in red ink arrows connecting Lorraine's instructions to Sloane's actions. Timestamps aligned in parallel columns. Dollar amounts circled and totaled in the margin. The notebook was no longer a diary. It was a structural failure report. And the structure it described was my family. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the pages covering my desk like blueprints for a building that had already failed inspection. The trust was signed. The evidence was complete. The confrontation was coming. Everything was in order. And then the baby cried. 2 rooms away. A small sound through the walls, not distress. Just the noise a newborn makes when the world is too big and too dark, and no one has explained the rules yet. I put my pen down and listened. The baby cried, and I put my pen down. That is all it took. One small sound from 2 rooms away. And the engineer who had spent 6 weeks building a case for revenge understood that revenge was the wrong blueprint entirely. This was not about a bedroom anymore. Not about a rug or a wine label or a shoulder pat from a woman who thought I was broken. This was about a child sleeping 2 rooms from a grandmother who had turned manipulation into a family trade. If I only protected the house, Lorraine would still have access to the baby. She would still coach Sloane. She would still shape how that child learned to love, which meant learning that love was a transaction, that family was a resource to be managed. That trust was something you offered when you wanted something and withdrew when you had it. Ruth's letter had said it plainly. Protect the family, not just the house. I had been reading it like an engineer, protect the structure. But Ruth was a teacher. She meant the people inside it. The house was never the point. The house was just the frame. The family was the load it was built to carry. Even Sloane. Even my daughter-in-law, who had drained my savings and erased my wife's rules from the refrigerator and served me wine at my own party. She was 32 years old and had spent her entire life under Lorraine's direction. If I only exposed her, I would win the battle and lose the grandchild. If I broke Lorraine's hold, I might save them both. I closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer beside the trust documents. Then I picked up my phone and texted Boyd 2 words, Christmas dinner. He replied in under a minute, I'll bring the paperwork. Merry Christmas, Vernon. The stage was set. The audience was assembling. And the woman sleeping in my guest room had no idea she was walking into the final act of a play she thought she was directing. Boyd had replied in under a minute that night. 9 days until Christmas. 9 days until every person in my house learned whose name was on the deed. But first, I needed to read the letter that started all of it. Boyd Ellsworth was already seated when I arrived, booth in the back corner of Pappas Brothers Steakhouse on Westheimer. Manila folder centered on the white tablecloth, like a surgical instrument laid out before the first incision. 2 bourbons were poured. The restaurant hummed low around us, dark paneling, warm leather, the smell of aged steak and quiet money. The kind of place where serious things get decided over medium-rare beef. Ruth wrote this 11 days before she passed, Boyd said, sliding a cream envelope across the table. She asked me to hold it until you were ready. She said, and these are her words, He will know when it is time, because someone will try to take the house before the grief is finished. I opened the envelope. The paper had softened from 2 years in Boyd's filing cabinet. But Ruth's handwriting was unmistakable, the careful slant of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching art students to see what was actually in front of them. She had written 3 pages. Not a goodbye. Not a love letter, though it was that too. It was a set of engineering specifications for a fortress she knew I would need to build after she was gone. She named the bedroom. She named the study. She described a daughter-in-law who would arrive softly and expand steadily. She described a mother behind the daughter-in-law. She did not write Lorraine's name. But she described the pattern, a woman who managed family the way a billing supervisor managed accounts, redirecting resources until the original owner could not recognize what had been taken. My wife wrote me a letter from her hospital bed. And it was not a goodbye. It was a blueprint drawn by someone who understood load distribution better than most engineers I had worked with in 40 years. Boyd let me sit with the letter for a long time. Then he opened the manila folder and laid out the trust documents. "The Ruth Callahan Family Trust is irrevocable," he said. "Once signed, the property belongs to the trust, not to you, not to Garrett, not to anyone who can be pressured, manipulated, or charmed into giving it away. You retain sole authority over residency rights. No one lives in that house without your written permission." The name Ruth, underlined twice, Boyd said, tapping the page, was Sloane's, not Lorraine's. Ruth believed Sloane could still be saved. She wanted you to remember that. No matter how this ends. I looked at the documents. 3 signature pages. A deed transfer. A notary seal Boyd had brought in his coat pocket. The entire weight of my life reduced to ink on paper in a steakhouse booth. Before I tell you what I signed, and what it meant before I show you what Ruth built from a hospital bed 2 years before anyone tried to take her house, comment your guess in one sentence. What do you think Ruth saw coming that no one else did? A quick note, the next part includes some details shaped for storytelling to honor the emotional truth. The lesson is what matters. I picked up Boyd's fountain pen heavy. The kind Ruth would have called unnecessarily beautiful. I signed my name on 3 pages. Each signature transferred 4 decades of work, 3 decades of marriage, and a house worth nearly $2 million into a trust named after a woman who had been gone for 6 years and was still the smartest person in the room. Have you ever signed your name and felt the pen carry the weight of everything you have ever built, everything you have ever lost, and everything you are about to protect, all in 3 strokes of ink on a white page, in a dim booth? Boyd notarized each page with a stamp he produced from his breast pocket. Then he raised his glass. "They are living in Ruth Callahan's house now," he said. "They just do not know it yet." I raised my glass and touched it to his. The clink was quiet. 2 old men in a back booth, toasting a dead woman who had outmaneuvered a living one from beyond the grave. The bourbon was smooth and warm going down. And for the first time in weeks, I tasted something other than patience. On the drive home, I passed the house and saw every light on. Lorraine's silhouette moved past the living room window, gesturing at spaces she would never redesign. I kept driving. I would be home in 20 minutes. The signed documents would be in my desk drawer in 21. And in 9 days, on Christmas, every person inside that house would learn whose name was on the deed. I slipped into the house that night and placed the signed documents in my desk drawer without turning on a single light. Lorraine's perfume still hung in the hallway. Every light she had left blazing was now off. The house dark and quiet, full of people sleeping soundly in rooms they believed would soon be theirs. The text arrived at 2:47 a.m. 3 lines from my son that were never meant for me. I had been staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, when the phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit the bedroom in pale blue. Garrett's name. I picked it up, expecting something about the baby, a feeding question, a temperature concern. The small emergencies of new parenthood that arrive at unreasonable hours. Instead, I read this, "Babe, don't push him on the study yet. Mom said wait till after Christmas when she's here full time. He'll give in on the bedroom first, then the rest follows. Just keep doing what we talked about, and don't let him see the bank stuff." I read it 3 times. Not because I did not understand it. I understood it on the first read, the way you understand a crack in a foundation the moment you see it. I read it 3 times because I needed to be certain that every word was real, that my son had written them, and that the man who had dried plates beside me at the kitchen sink had known everything and chosen her side over mine. Don't let him see the bank stuff. 6 words. My son wrote 6 words about hiding financial exploitation from his own father, and he misspelled none of them, which means he had typed that sentence before. This was not a slip. This was a status update. Garrett was not caught in the middle. He was standing on their side of the line and reporting in. Mom said wait till after Christmas. Mom. He called Lorraine Mom in a text to his wife about taking my house. Not Lorraine, not your mother. Mom. the word reserved for the woman who raised you, repurposed for the woman directing your father's dispossession. Ruth earned that word over 35 years. Lorraine had it handed to her in a group chat I was never meant to see. I sat in the dark for a long time. The phone lay in my hand, screen dimming, then going black, then lighting up again each time my thumb moved without my permission. I could save the text and direct evidence of conspiracy, coordinated concealment. A son admitting in writing that he knew about every phase and helped hide the financial trail. It would have made the dossier bulletproof. But the dossier was already complete. 47 pages, 212 entries. The trust was signed. The stage was chosen. What I needed now was not more evidence. What I needed was to let go of the last thing. I was still holding on to the hope that my son was innocent. Let me tell you what it costs to delete a text message from your only child at 3 in the morning. It costs exactly as much as every other thing you have lost. It weighs nothing at all. And it is the heaviest thing you will ever hold in your hand. I pressed delete. The thread disappeared. 35 years of raising a boy, teaching him to measure twice, teaching him to stand up straight, teaching him that a man protects the people who cannot protect themselves. Gone in 3 lines, sent to the wrong number at 2:47 in the morning. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back. My hand drifted to Ruth's side of the bed, and the cold sheet the undisturbed pillow. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe. Lorraine was asleep in the guest room. Sloane was asleep in the nursery. Garrett was asleep somewhere between the 2 women he had chosen over his father. And the baby. The baby was the only person in this house who had not yet learned to lie. I did not sleep. I watched the ceiling shift from black to gray to the pale gold of a December dawn. Garrett came downstairs at 7 and poured himself coffee. He leaned against the counter and looked at me sitting at the kitchen table, Ruth's eyes, Ruth's jaw, Ruth's habit of asking questions he already knew the answer to. "Morning, Dad. Sleep okay?" I looked at my son. I held his gaze the way you hold a beam, level steady, deliberate, giving nothing away. "Best sleep I've had in weeks." 7 days until Christmas. 7 days became 6. Garrett never mentioned the text. He never checked his sent messages. Never flinched when our eyes met over breakfast. Never showed a single flicker of awareness that his father now carried the full weight of his complicity alongside the coffee mug. I drank and smiled and waited. I watched 2 people plan a party in my house and realized that the best thing I could do was let them believe they were in charge of it. Sloane brought it up on a Wednesday afternoon. She was standing at the kitchen island with her phone propped against the fruit bowl. Lorraine's voice filling the room through the speaker the way her perfume had filled it the week before, everywhere, uninvited, impossible to ignore. We were thinking a 1-month celebration, both families. Here at the house, if that's okay with you. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said before she could finish. "Let me handle the costs." Ruth would have wanted this family together under one roof for something like this. Silence. Sloane blinked through the speaker. I heard Lorraine inhale sharply, not surprise but satisfaction, the sound of a woman who believed she had finally worn down the last obstacle. "I told you." "Sloane," Lorraine said. And the laugh that followed was warm and expansive and aimed directly at me. "I told you he'd come around. He just needed time." The old man finally gets it. The old man finally gets it. She said it on speakerphone, in the kitchen of a house she has never paid a single dollar toward, about a man who has spent the past 6 weeks building the case that will end her ambition. And she laughed. I let the laugh fill the room. I let it settle into the walls. I wanted to remember exactly how it sounded, because in 6 days I was going to remind her of it. "You really want to host?" Sloane asked. And the suspicion in her voice was thin but present. The instinct of a woman who has been coached to expect resistance and does not know what to do with agreement. "This is Ruth's house," I said. "This is Ruth's grandchild. There is no better place for a celebration. Every word was true. She just did not know which celebration I was planning. Sloane smiled. Lorraine declared she would arrive early to help with decorations. Garrett wandered in, heard the plan, and nodded without comment, the same careful neutrality he had perfected over 2 years of standing in the doorway between his wife and his father, belonging to neither, protecting only himself. That evening, after the house went quiet, I closed my study door and turned on the desk lamp. The room smelled like leather and cedar, and the faint oak scent of the bourbon Ruth had given me for our 30th anniversary, still sealed, still sitting behind the bottom drawer where it had waited for an occasion worthy of opening it. I assembled the envelope in precise order. Trust documents on top, the Ruth Callahan Family Trust, signed, notarized, irrevocable. Then the financial records. 9 months of redirected funds, wire transfers, statements showing exactly where the emergency savings had gone and whose name was on the receiving account. Then the notebook. 47 pages. Every date and timestamp and quoted phrase arranged in the sequence an engineer presents a failure analysis. And on top of everything, Ruth's letter. Her words would be the first thing they saw when the envelope opened. Her voice would speak before mine. I wrote on the front in the same block letters I had used on blueprints for 40 years. Open when the celebration begins. Then I pressed the seal shut and placed the envelope in the bottom drawer beside the bourbon. I spoke to my dead wife in an empty room and asked her if I was doing the right thing. If that sounds like madness, then you have never loved someone so completely that their silence still sounds like guidance. I told her what I was going to say. I told her how I was going to say it. The house did not creak. It did not settle. It held the way a well-built structure holds when it has been reinforced from the inside. I turned off the study light and stood in the doorway. Down the hall. Lorraine's voice drifted from the guest room, still on the phone with Sloane. Still planning, still mapping rooms she would never redesign. In 6 days, every person in this house would sit at the same table. I would stand. I would open the envelope, and Ruth Callahan would have the last word in the house she helped me build. 6 days passed, the way a countdown passes, when you know what is at the end of it, slowly on the surface, precisely underneath. Lorraine planned, Sloane decorated. Garrett carried boxes without meeting my eyes, and the envelope sat in the bottom drawer, waiting. Christmas morning. The house smelled like cinnamon and conspiracy, and I had dressed for both. Das vest, pressed shirt, the tie Ruth had given me the last Christmas she was alive. I buttoned the vest over the envelope and checked the mirror. 4 ounces of paper against my ribs. It did not show. Guests began arriving at 11. Cousins I had not seen since Ruth's funeral. Garrett's college roommate and his wife. 3 of Sloane's aunts from Beaumont. Lorraine's older brother, Howard, who drove in that morning and shook my hand at the door like a man who had heard a version of this story that did not include me as the protagonist. Lorraine greeted every arrival as if she owned the foyer. She positioned herself at the center of the living room and conducted tours 3 and 40 minutes, steering guests through the house with the expansive hand, gestures of a real estate agent showcasing a new listing. Wait until you see what we're doing with the study, she told a cluster of Sloane's aunts, her voice carrying above every other conversation in the room. Open it right up into a playroom. And the master bedroom Vernon's been so generous about sharing space. This house was meant for a big family. Vernon understands. She used that phrase on every tour. Vernon understands the house needs new energy. Vernon understands families grow. Vernon understands it is time to make room. She spoke about me in the third person while I stood 15 feet away, and not once did she lower her voice. In structural engineering, we call it the moment before the load test, when every beam is in place, every measurement has been taken, and the only thing left is to apply the weight and see what holds. That Christmas morning, I was the weight. I stood by the front door and shook hands and hugged people I loved and smiled at people I did not know and let Lorraine perform. Every tour she gave was another witness. Every renovation she announced was another promise she would not be able to keep. Every time she said Vernon understands, she was building the audience for the moment when they would learn what I actually understood. Garrett found me in the hallway between the second and third tour. He leaned against the wall with his hands in his pockets. Ruth's posture, the one she used when she was about to say something careful. "Dad, you okay? You seem calm." "It's Christmas, son. I am exactly where I should be." He studied my face for a moment. Something flickered behind his eyes, not suspicion, not guilt, but the low hum of a man who senses a frequency he cannot name. Then Sloane called from the kitchen, and he turned away. And the flicker went with him. At 1 o'clock. Lorraine gathered everyone in the living room. 23 people arranged on couches and dining chairs and the piano bench Ruth had reupholstered the year before she died. The baby slept in a carrier by the window. The tree lights blinked. The turkey smell drifted from the kitchen like a promise of normalcy. Lorraine raised her glass. "To this beautiful house," she said, and her voice filled the room the way it had filled every room since she arrived, completely, without permission. "To new beginnings, to family growing under one roof, and to Vernon, who has opened his home and his heart to all of us. To new beginnings." 23 people raised their glasses. 23 people drank to new beginnings in a house that had belonged to an irrevocable trust for 11 days. Not one of them, not the daughter-in-law, not the mastermind, not my own son, thought to ask whose name was on the deed. I raised my glass. I drank. The wine was from my cellar, the same Pinot Sloane had once sent me to fetch like a servant. It tasted different now. It tasted like patience being rewarded. I felt the envelope press against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Ruth's letter was inside. Her voice would speak first. The glasses came down. Lorraine beamed. Sloane squeezed Garrett's arm. The room hummed with the satisfied warmth of people who believed they knew how this story ended. I stepped forward. "Before we sit down to dinner," I said. And my voice was steady, 40 years of presenting to boards and inspectors and clients who needed to hear certainty. "I would like to say a few words about this house. And about Ruth." The room went quiet. Lorraine's smile held, but her eyes changed. Lorraine's eyes held mine for 2 seconds, the kind of 2 seconds where a person decides whether to worry or to dismiss. She dismissed. Her smile reassembled, and she settled back against the couch cushion like a woman who had already won, and was simply watching the ceremony confirm it. Then my phone vibrated against the envelope, and Boyd Ellsworth's name lit up the screen like a warning flare from the one man who would not call during Christmas dinner unless the building was on fire. "Give me one moment, everyone," I said, and stepped into the hallway. The murmur behind me was polite guests assuming a work call, a neighbor's emergency, the minor interruptions that delay speeches at family gatherings. Lorraine's voice rose above the murmur. "Take your time, Vernon. We're not going anywhere." The room laughed softly. I closed the hallway door. "Vernon, I just got a call from a colleague," Boyd said. No greeting, no Merry Christmas. His voice had the clipped precision of a man reading damage coordinates. "Lorraine Prescott retained Dennis Whitfield 3 days ago. He is filing a petition, asking the court to name Lorraine a temporary co-guardian of the baby and to grant her the right to live wherever the baby lives. Starting with this house." I pressed my free hand flat against the hallway wall. The plaster was cool under my palm. The same wall I had framed 30 years ago, the same studs I had nailed while Ruth painted the trim. Behind me, 3 days ago, while I was sealing the envelope, while she was selecting paint colors for my study, while she was narrating renovation tours to guests who nodded and smiled, she had already hired a lawyer to take my house through my grandchild. Temporary co-guardian. She was going to use a 6-week-old baby. A baby who could not hold its own head up as a legal instrument to claim permanent residency in a house worth nearly $2 million that she had never paid a single mortgage payment toward. Boyd, does the trust hold? The trust is ironclad. Whitfield's filing is dead on arrival. He just does not know it yet. But Vernon, this means she was never planning to ask. She was planning to take. I looked down the hallway toward the closed door. Through it, I could hear Lorraine laughing, the same expansive laugh she had used on speakerphone weeks ago. The same laugh that had called me the old man. Behind that door, she sat in my living room, in a chair my wife had chosen, toasting new beginnings with wine from my cellar, while her attorney prepared paperwork to take my house. Through a baby who shared my blood. Thank you. Boyd. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Vernon. Give them hell. I hung up and stood alone in the hallway. The cedar closet beside me breathed its quiet scent into the cool air. Through the door, 23 voices blended into the comfortable hum of people who believed they were at a celebration. I had one doubt left. One small, stubborn corner of my mind that had whispered for weeks, maybe you are overreacting. Maybe she is just a difficult woman who loves her daughter too much. Maybe this can be handled with a quiet conversation over coffee, and everyone walks away intact. Do you know what it takes to remove the last shred of mercy from a 70-year-old man who spent his whole life building things instead of tearing them down? One phrase. Co-guardian. She was going to use Ruth's grandchild as a crowbar to pry Ruth's house open. That corner of my mind went dark. And it did not come back on. I straightened my vest. I touched the envelope through the fabric, 4 ounces. Sharp-edged, warm from pressing against my chest all morning. No mercy. No second chances. No quiet resolution. This would be public. This would be permanent. And it would happen in the next 10 minutes. I opened the hallway door and walked back into the living room. 23 faces turned toward me. The tree lights blinked. The baby slept by the window. Lorraine sat at the center of the couch with her glass still in her hand. Her smile automatic, her posture radiating the confidence of a woman who believed she was watching a defeated man return to finish a sentimental toast. I apologize for the interruption, I said. My voice was steady. 4th years of standing before review boards and inspection panels and clients who needed to hear certainty. Now about this house, and about Ruth. I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out the envelope. Ruth wrote this letter 2 years ago, I said. I think it is time you all heard what she had to say. Lorraine's glass lowered half an inch. Garrett took 1 step backward, and the room held its breath. I broke the seal with my thumb and pulled out the first page. Ruth's handwriting steady and clear. The penmanship of a woman who taught art to children and knew that the most important lines are the ones you draw last. I read her words aloud. My voice did not shake. Vernon, if you are reading this to other people, then it has already started. Someone is trying to take the house. I do not know who yet, but I know the shape of it. It will come through kindness first, then necessity, then entitlement. I paused and looked up. 23 faces stared back at me. Lorraine's smile was still in place, but it had gone rigid, held by muscle memory, not confidence. She did not know what was in the rest of the envelope. She only knew that a dead woman had just described her playbook in 3 words. Kindness, necessity, entitlement. I continued reading. Protect the family. Not just the walls, the family. The house is not a prize, it is a promise. I built it with my husband, and I am asking him now to make sure it outlasts everyone who would turn it into something we never intended. Including family. Especially family. My wife wrote those words 11 days before she died. In a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and goodbye, and she was still sharper than every person who had spent the past 2 months trying to take what she had built. She had seen the shape of it before the shape had a name. Before Lorraine, before Sloane's rehearsed requests, before the bedroom probe and the drained savings and the attorney hired in secret. Ruth saw it all, and she wrote it down, and she gave it to Boyd Ellsworth with one instruction: wait until he is ready. I folded the letter and set it on the side table. Then I pulled out the next document. This house was transferred to the Ruth Callahan Family Trust on December 14th, I said. It is irrevocable. No one in this room, including me, can sell it, mortgage it, or give it away. Ruth owns this house now, the way she always should have. Lorraine's glass tilted. A drop of wine ran down the stem and landed on her thumb. She did not wipe it. I pulled out the financial summary Boyd had prepared. Over the past 9 months, $40,000 was redirected from our family emergency fund, a fund Ruth and I built over 20 years, into accounts controlled by or benefiting one person in this room. I did not look at Lorraine. I did not need to. Every other face in the room did it for me. Then I said the part that had removed my last hesitation in the hallway 10 minutes earlier. 3 days ago, while you were all receiving your invitations to this celebration, Lorraine Prescott retained an attorney named Dennis Whitfield to petition the court, naming her a temporary co-guardian of my grandchild. She intended to use my 6-week-old grandchild as legal leverage to claim permanent residency in this house. A secret attorney. A co-guardianship filing using a newborn baby. And she was standing in my living room holding wine she did not pay for. In a house she had spent the morning touring like a new owner, smiling at relatives who were now staring at her the way you stare at a crack that has just appeared in a wall you trusted. The room did not gasp. It did not murmur. It went silent, the way a building goes silent in the half-second between the crack and the collapse, every person holding their breath. Every eye turning to Lorraine Prescott, who stood at the center of Ruth Callahan's living room with absolutely nothing left to say. Sloane's face had gone gray. She stared at the floor as if it might open beneath her. Garrett stood behind them both. And for the first time since this started, he looked directly at me. Not at Sloane, not at Lorraine. At me. Ruth's eyes in a face that had chosen the wrong side and was only now beginning to understand the cost. Lorraine opened her mouth. No sound came out. She looked at Sloane. Sloane did not look back. She looked at Garrett. Garrett did not move. She set the wine glass down on Ruth's side table with a click that echoed in the silence like a verdict. Picked up her purse from the couch and walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked across the hard wood. Every guest watched her go. No one spoke. "Lorraine," I said, and my voice carried down the hallway after her. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "You are welcome, leave. But the conversation is not over." Lorraine's hand was on the door handle when her brother's voice cut across the room like a blade nobody expected, least of all Lorraine. Howard Prescott, her older brother, a 67-year-old retired postal supervisor from Beaumont, had driven 3 hours that morning and shaken my hand at the door like a man who deserved better relatives. Now he stood up from the dining chair he had been sitting in and pointed at his sister with a finger that did not shake. "You told us he invited you," Howard said. "You told us this was his idea. You told us you were coming down here to help a generous old man with his grandchild." His voice carried the weary certainty of a man who had seen this pattern before and had hoped this time it would be different. "You are the worst of us, Lorraine. You always have been. But this time you did it with witnesses." Lorraine turned from the door. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. 2 of Sloane's aunts from Beaumont stood as well, not to defend Lorraine but to demand answers. How long had she been planning this? Had she lied to them about the invitation? Had she used the baby as a pretext from the beginning? The questions came fast and Lorraine answered none of them. She stood between the door and the room like a woman caught between 2 fires and choosing neither. There is a difference between a person who does evil and a person who follows evil because it is easier than standing alone. If you cannot see that difference, you will punish the wrong people and forgive the wrong ones too. I had spent 6 weeks learning to see it. Sloane broke. She stood in the corner with the baby against her chest. And the tears came silently at first, then not silently. Her mascara ran in dark lines down her face, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not defiance, not calculation, not the rehearsed softness Lorraine had coached into her. Fear, the genuine, unscripted fear of a woman watching her mother be abandoned by her own blood, and understanding for the first time that the structure she had been standing on was never solid. "I didn't know about the lawyer," she said, her voice breaking on every other word. "I didn't know about the co-guardian filing. She told me it was about helping with the baby. She told me you wanted us here. I believed her." I looked at Sloane Callahan, 32 years old, mascara streaking her face, standing in the wreckage of her mother's ambition. And I saw someone I had not expected to see. I saw a victim. Not an innocent one. She had taken my money. She had moved my furniture. She had ordered me to fetch wine in my own house. But she had done it all on instructions from a woman who had been directing her life since before she could spell her own name. "You were wrong," I said. "But you are not your mother. And that is the only reason this conversation is not over for you." Garrett followed me onto the porch. I did not invite him. He came because he had nowhere else to go. The living room was full of people who had just learned what he had helped conceal, and the kitchen held nothing but cold food and colder silence. The December air hit us both. I gripped the porch railing, the same railing I had built the summer Garrett turned 12. The same wood his mother had sanded and stained while he handed her brushes. I listed 3 failures. 3 moments when my son could have chosen his father over his comfort. I did not list them to humiliate him. I listed them because a man who does not know where he failed will fail in exactly the same places again. The kitchen. When you started to warn me and walked away at the sound of her voice. The text you sent me by accident that proved you knew everything. And every dinner where you watched your wife treat your father like hired help and said nothing. 3 chances to be a man. You chose silence every time. Dad. I was trying to keep everyone. You were trying to keep peace. But peace built on silence is not peace. Garrett, it is just a quieter version of the same betrayal. He cried. Not the way a man cries, the way a boy cries, when he has been caught and does not yet know the difference between remorse and embarrassment. I loved him. I would always love him. But I would never trust him the same way again. Garrett went inside. I stayed on the porch. Through the window, I watched the living room, empty relatives gathering coats. Lorraine sitting motionless on the couch with no one beside her. Stone holding the baby in the far corner with her back to her mother. On Ruth's side table, the wine glass still stood untouched. Lorraine sat on that couch for a long time. When she finally stood, no one helped her with her coat, no one walked her to the door. She left the way a person leaves a building after an evacuation, alone, carrying only what she came in with, leaving behind every claim she had ever made on the rooms she walked through. The house was quieter after Christmas than it had been since Ruth died. But this time the silence was not grief. It was the sound of a family figuring out which pieces could still be used. I did not make a single phone call in the days that followed. I did not send a single message. I did not need to. The 23 people who sat in my living room on Christmas Day did all the work for me. Because the truth once spoken in a room full of witnesses does not need a marketing campaign. It markets itself. Howard Prescott called on the 27th. His voice was gruff and tired. The voice of a man who had driven 3 hours home on Christmas night and spent 2 days fielding calls from relatives who wanted to know how much of it was true. Vernon. I want you to know this is not the first time she has done something like this, he said. It is the first time someone had the evidence to stop her. Thank you for that. I am sorry it was necessary. Howard? So am I. By the 28th. Lorraine had been cut off by her own brother, 3 cousins, and the only friend she had mentioned by name during her 45-minute tour of my house. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts went unanswered. The woman who had filled every room with her voice now lived in a silence of her own making. A lie is a load-bearing wall made of paper. It holds everything up until someone tests it, and then every room it supported collapses at once. And the people who were living in those rooms have nowhere to stand. Lorraine had built an entire floor plan out of lies, and 23 witnesses had tested every wall simultaneously. I sat in my study through those quiet days and drank black coffee and did not open my notebook. There was nothing left to write. The pen sat untouched on the desk for the first time in 2 months. The house settled around me in the winter cold, and the Christmas decorations Sloane and Lorraine had hung still clung to the walls and banisters untouched, unmentioned. Slowly becoming evidence of a celebration no one wanted to remember. On the 29th, there was a knock on my study door. I recognized the knock. It was the same soft double tap Sloane had used the morning she asked to rearrange the bedroom. The rehearsed knock, the one Lorraine had coached her to use. But this time it sounded different. Not softer, not louder, just emptier, as if the performance had been stripped out and what remained was just a woman standing outside a door. Not sure whether she would be let in. "Come in." Sloane sat in the chair across from my desk, the chair where Boyd would have sat. She did not cry. She did not clasp her hands the way Lorraine had taught her. She placed them flat on her thighs and looked at me directly. "I blocked her number 2 days ago," she said. "I wanted to tell you myself, not through Garrett. I owe you that." 9 words. She said 9 words and then she waited. The waiting was the thing that told me it was real. A manipulator fills silence with explanation, with context, with the soft architecture of justification. A person who is actually changing fills it with patience, with the willingness to sit in discomfort and let the other person decide what comes next. When someone who has been lying to you for months sits down and says 9 honest words without crying, without explaining, without asking for anything in return, that is not forgiveness arriving. That is the foundation being poured for a building that might, if you are very careful, hold weight again someday. That is a start. "Sloane," I said. Not "it is enough." Not "you are forgiven." A start. Because in engineering, you do not declare a structure sound after the first repair. You test it under load. And the load had not arrived yet. She nodded once and left the room without another word. The door closed softly behind her. I opened my desk drawer and took out Ruth's letter. I read the last line, the one I had not read aloud at Christmas, the one I had kept for myself. Ruth had written, "If Sloane is the one who comes to you first, she is the one worth saving. If it is Garrett, forgive him, Sloane. He should have known better." I folded the letter and put it back. Ruth was still right. Ruth had predicted the order. Sloane first, then Garrett. "Forgive him slower," she had written. I folded that instruction into the same part of my mind where I kept load tolerances and safety margins numbers you do not forget, because lives depend on getting them right. I set 3 chairs at the dining table, not the living room, not the study. The dining table where Ruth served every important conversation for 31 years, and I waited for my son and his wife to sit down. The 4th chair. Ruth's chair at the opposite head stayed empty. I did not move it. I did not need to explain why. They came in together. Sloane sat first, Garrett followed. Pulling his chair close to hers, not for solidarity, I thought, but for cover. Old habits. I placed my hands flat on the table, palms down, the way I used to lay out blueprints before a client meeting. And I began. 3 conditions. 1, you contribute financially. Rent, utilities, groceries. This is not a hotel. 2, you respect boundaries. My study, my schedule, my spaces. If you want to rearrange something, you ask and you wait for an answer. 3. The master bedroom is mine, permanently, non-negotiably. Ruth and I built that room together, and no one will sleep in it except me. I let each condition sit in the air before moving to the next. The morning light came through the dining room windows and fell across the table. The same table I had built from reclaimed oak the year we moved in. The same grain Ruth used to trace with her finger while she talked. The house belongs to the Ruth Callahan Family Trust. You live here because I grant written permission, and I can revoke that permission at any time, for any reason. This is not a threat. It is a fact. Treat it accordingly. A foundation is not the building. It is the thing that makes the building possible. You can pour a foundation and never build on it if the soil turns out to be wrong. That is what I was offering them. A foundation, not a building, not yet. Maybe not ever if the ground shifted again. Garrett leaned forward. Dad, we understand. I am not finished. Garrett. Understanding is not the same as agreeing. I need you both to agree, out loud, to my face, right now. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Heavier than the oak table. Heavier than Ruth's empty chair. I sipped my coffee and waited. I had spent 40 years presenting terms to clients and review boards, and I had learned one thing about silence. The person who breaks it first is the person who needs the deal more. Sloan spoke first. I agree, all three. No argument, no negotiation, no qualifying clause. 3 words, and they cost her more than anything Lorraine had ever taught her to say. She looked directly at me when she said them. And her eyes were clear, not the rehearsed softness from the furniture probe, not the mascara street collapse of Christmas Day. Clear, steady. The eyes of a woman who had decided something and was not going to explain it. Garrett followed, but slower. He looked at the table when he said it, not at me, not at Sloan, at the wood, at the place where his mother used to sit and reach across to hold his hand when he was struggling with homework. I agree. Dad. My son looked at the table instead of at me when he agreed. And I hope he was remembering what it felt like to live in a house where someone loved you enough to tell you the truth, instead of protecting you from it. I wanted to reach across and hold his hand. I did not. That would come later, or it would not come at all. This is not forgiveness, I said. This is a new foundation. Forgiveness is a structure that takes time to build, and I will not pour it until I know the ground beneath it will hold. You will show me with what you do, not with what you say. Starting now. They nodded. They stood. Sloan paused in the doorway and turned back. Vernon, the rug. The Persian rug you scrubbed on your hands and knees. If you ever want to bring it back from storage, I will help you carry it. I looked at her for a long time. She did not flinch. She did not fill the silence. She just stood there and waited. The way a person waits when they know the answer matters more than the question. Maybe in the spring, I said. It was the first time I had used the word maybe about something good since Ruth died. Maybe. That word sat with me through the last days of December like a seed dropped into soil I had not tended in years. I did not know if it would grow, but I had said it. And saying it had changed something in the air of the house. A pressure valve released. Just slightly. Just enough. I heard the screwdriver before I saw him. The sound of my son tightening a hinge I had mentioned once. 3 months ago. To no one who was listening. Garrett was on his knees in the kitchen. Philip's head in his right hand, left palm bracing the door. He did not announce it. He did not ask for credit. He just knelt on the tile floor and fixed the hinge that had been squeaking since September. The door swung shut without a sound for the first time in 3 months. He stood, tested it twice, wiped the screwdriver on his jeans, and put it back in the drawer where I kept it. It was a small thing, but small things are how you test a foundation. You do not start with the full load. You start with the weight of a door. Over the next few days, the small things accumulated. Trash taken out before I noticed the bag was full. Gutters checked after a rain. The porch light bulb replaced the one that had been flickering since November. And then, one evening after dinner, Garrett did something he had not done in 2 years. He sat across from me in the living room and talked. Not about the baby, not about schedules or logistics. He talked about work. He asked about a drainage issue at the neighbor's property line. He stayed for 40 minutes and did not check his phone once. Then he said it. Dad, I am not going to explain why I stayed quiet. There is no explanation that makes it okay. I just want you to know that I know what I did. And I know what it cost you. And I am going to spend a long time making it right. When your son apologizes without excuse, is no but, no because, no I was trying to pay attention. That kind of apology is the rarest thing a parent will ever hear. And it means the person standing in front of you is not the same person who walked away at the sound of his wife's voice 3 months ago. He looked at me when he said it. Not at the table, not at the floor, at me. Ruth's letter had said to forgive him slower. She did not say never. Slower, not never. The next morning I drove to Katie alone. Gas station coffee in the cup holder, cheap, burnt exactly right for a morning spent bringing something precious home. I pulled into the CubeSmart lot, backed into the loading bay, and rolled the unit door open. The cedar chip smell hit me first. Then the chemical sealant. Then underneath it all, faint. Preserved. Impossible, Ruth. I unwrapped the chair the way you unwrap something sacred. Slowly, with both hands, peeling back each moving blanket until the velvet appeared deep green, worn pale on the arms, faded in the exact shape of my wife. The indentation in the seat was still there. 26 years of evenings. 26 years of reading with her feet tucked under her. And the chair remembered every single one. I loaded it into the truck and drove home. Garrett was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when I carried it through the front door. Let me help you. Dad. No, I said. This one I carry myself. He did not argue. He understood, or he was learning to. Some weight a man needs to carry alone. Not because he is too proud to accept help, but because the act of carrying it is the point. This chair was between me and Ruth, and the last time it left this house. I had wrapped it like a wound. Now I was carrying it home. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just older. Both things were true. I set it by the bay window in the master bedroom. The afternoon light hit the velvet the way it always had, warm on the left arm, cool on the right. I put my hand in Ruth's indentation and held it there for a long time. Then I sat in my own chair across the room and looked at hers. The bedroom was complete again. That evening I left the bedroom door open for the first time in months. Garrett walked past, glanced in, and saw the chair by the window. He stopped. He did not say a word. He stood in the doorway and nodded once, then kept walking. 3 steps past the door. He stopped again. Through the wall came a sound I had not heard from my son since Ruth's funeral. Garrett, 35 years old, crying quietly in the hallway where his mother used to hang her coat. I did not go to him. I listened through the wall until the crying stopped, and then I listened to his footsteps move down the hallway and down the stairs. I sat in my chair and looked at Ruth's chair by the window. And I understood that some repairs happen in hallways at night, without witnesses. And they are no less real for being private. The morning light came through the bay window the way Ruth always said it would, slow and gold, and unreasonably kind for a world that had spent the trying to take everything I built. I picked up her photograph from the nightstand. The frame was cool in my hands. The same silver frame she had chosen at a shop in Galveston, the year we turned 50. The same photograph where she is laughing at something I said that I can no longer remember. I held it and I spoke to her the way I had spoken to her every morning since she died silently, inside the part of my mind that still sets a place for her at every table. The baby has your chin. Ruth. That stubborn little line that means she will argue with everyone about everything and be right most of the time. You would have held her for hours. You would have been better at this than I am, but you knew that. Which is why you left the letter. I defended the house. I defended your chair and your rug and your side table and the bedroom where we slept for 31 years. But the thing I am proudest of is not the defense. It is the fact that I did not tear the family apart to do it. I cracked it. I cracked it badly, but I did not demolish it. If you have listened this far, then you already know what this story is about. It is not about a house, and it was never about revenge. It is about what happens when a man who spent 40 years building things for other people finally decides to build something for himself. A boundary no one can cross, without his permission. Not a wall, not a fortress, a boundary. The difference matters. Your letter said to protect the family, not just the house. I think I did both. I think you would tell me I waited too long, and acted too harshly, and forgave too slowly. And then you would make me coffee, and sit in your chair and say, "But you got it done. Vernon, you always get it done." I put the photograph back on the nightstand, and looked at the chair. The velvet caught the first gold light of the morning, and the indentation where she sat for 26 years held its shape, the way it had held it through a war and a storage unit in Katy and 2 months of siege. The chair held. The house held. Downstairs, the coffee maker gurgled the same machine Ruth bought the year she died. The one she said would outlast both of us. She was right about that, too. Garrett was making coffee. Not because I asked, not because it was a condition of the new foundation. Because it was a quiet morning near the end of December, and his father was upstairs. And that is what you do in a house where people are trying. In 40 years of structural engineering, I inspected over 600 bridges. Not one of them was perfect. Every single one had cracks. The ones still standing are the ones where someone found the crack, measured it, and repaired it before the next storm arrived. The ones that fell are the ones where people looked at the crack and said it would probably be fine. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I had defended for 2 months. Ruth's chair by the window, her photograph on the nightstand, the bay window full of slow December gold, the house quiet, the house warm, the house entirely, irrevocably, held in a trust bearing her name. I said it out loud, to the empty chair, to the photograph, to the house itself. A good bridge is not one that never cracks. It is one that gets repaired at the right time. Then I went downstairs. Garrett was standing in the kitchen, holding 2 mugs, one black, one with cream, the way Ruth used to make hers. He held out the black one. "Morning, Dad." I took the mug. The coffee was strong. The banister under my other hand was smooth from 30 years of family palms. And somewhere upstairs, in a bedroom that belonged to a trust named after the woman who saw everything coming, Ruth Callahan's reading chair sat by the bay window, holding the morning light the way it had held her gently, permanently, and with no intention of ever letting go. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 40 years building structures for other people and nearly lost the one that mattered most, my own home, my own family. I let the disrespect build for 2 years before I acted. I watched the warning signs and told myself it would get better on its own. Do not make my mistake. The moment someone treats your home like a property they are entitled to, the moment a family member drains your savings and calls it sharing, that is when you act. Not later. Not when the damage is done. Now. This was never supposed to be a revenge story. I did not set out for revenge. I set out to protect what my wife and I built together over 31 years. But sometimes protecting what you love looks like a revenge story to the people who were trying to take it. The lesson I learned is this. Boundaries are not cruelty. Say no to someone who is exploiting you is not selfishness. It is survival. And if you have been sitting quietly while someone dismantles your dignity piece by piece, I am telling you from the other side, it is not too late. I believe God put me through this so I could stand here and tell you defend what you built. Your patience is a strength, but your silence is not a strategy. The best revenge story is not one where you destroy someone. It is one where you simply refuse to be destroyed. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently? Would you have acted sooner? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. I read every comment, and your presence here means more than you know. Please remember that some details in this story were adjusted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The message is what matters, and I hope it stays with you.